Have you ever been in an argument with someone where the tension and conflict just kept escalating? That's probably because pride and anger started to have its way. In this video, I will show you 4 ways that pride and anger are causing communication problems in your relationship and how to deal with it. You've probably experienced this a few times in your life. You're in a conversation with someone and it starts to become an argument. The frustration and anger within you starts to rise up, and then things start to go downhill from there. This usually happens when our pride and anger gets triggered and it starts to have its way in our lives at that moment. In one of my coaching workshops, I talk about the pride equation, and I explain that any emotion mixed with pride becomes destructive behavior. Pride mixed with anger is not a good combination, and it usually results in us making a lot of destructive decisions, saying a lot of destructive words, and doing a lot of destructive actions. When I say destructive, I mean we do a lot of things that tear down instead of build up. You see, in any communication, even in arguments, you need to learn to be constructive. What you say and do must contribute to the resolution or solution of that problem. But this can only happen when we have humility, understanding, and self-control. Here are 4 ways that pride and anger cause communication problems in your relationships. Number 1, pride wants to win at all costs. In communication, the ultimate goal is not always agreement, but understanding. There will be times that both parties communicating won't be able to resolve their differences and they can't come to an agreement. In situations like that, the goal should be mutual understanding. Here, you try to understand the point of view and perspective of the other person, and you might not agree with it, but you understand where they're coming from and why you guys can't come to an agreement. But when pride starts to have its way in our hearts and minds, it cannot accept that the other person won't agree with them. Pride wants to win at all costs. A person who has a pride problem usually thinks that he or she is 100% right and cannot accept that their argument is being rejected. Sometimes they'll even use threats and manipulation to force the other person to agree with them. And if this doesn't work, they take the rejection of their argument or ideas personally, and they end up being resentful, angry, and judgmental towards the other person. People with pride problems have an excessive view of themselves. They cannot accept losing the argument to the other person, and they also can't accept that the other person's argument might be equal to theirs. And this makes it very difficult for anyone to have good communication with someone who has a pride problem. Number 2, pride, when triggered, becomes extremely defensive. A big part of good communication is active listening. A good listener will always be understanding. A good listener will always seek to understand the context, the motive, and the main point of the other person he or she is talking to. When you talk to someone who has a pride problem and you say something that offends them or triggers their pride, they usually stop listening from that point onwards. They start to fixate on that negative word or phrase that has triggered them. That word that you said has threatened their high and lofty thinking of themselves, and their defenses start to come up. Whatever words that you've said that follow that offensive word are no longer registering in their minds, because their minds are now busy defending and countering that one offensive word or phrase that you've used. And even if you had a good motive or a really good point at the end, they will miss out on this because the only thing that matters to them now is that negative word or phrase that you've said against them. Have you ever had this experience of communicating with someone and you thought you were having a good conversation, and in the end you realize that they took offense on something that you've said and they fixated on it and they have missed out on your point entirely? If yes, why don't you share with us that experience and how you felt during that moment? Share it with us in the comments below. Again, this is another reason why pride really messes up your communication and why it's very difficult to have good communication with someone who has a pride problem. Number 3, pride-controlled anger overpowers your point. When you communicate, you usually have a point that you want to get across clearly to the other person. Getting your point across is one of your main priorities, and all the other words that you use are just there to help clarify or give context to your point. Now, anger is a very strong emotion. When you're angry and your pride starts to dictate how your anger is expressed, it usually ends up in something destructive. And one way that pride-controlled anger is most destructive is in communication. Since anger is such a strong emotion, it usually overpowers the point that you want to make in that conversation. When we are angry, we usually end up using words that are not helpful to our main point. Words that are expressed in anger usually distract people from the main point, and when people miss out on your point, you get more frustrated and angry. And this becomes an unproductive cycle of bad communication. Here's an example. A mom once approached me and asked me for advice about her daughter. She said that the night before we met, her 15-year-old daughter came home very late, almost 12 midnight. That whole afternoon and evening, the mom kept calling and texting her out of worry, and she was not replying. Finally, the daughter came home safe and sound, and when her mother saw her, her worry turned into anger, and she started scolding her daughter, saying a lot of hurtful, angry words to her, and the daughter ended up being grounded a few weeks as punishment. So the next day, the mom told me what happened and asked me if what she did was right. I asked the mom, "What did you feel when your daughter wasn't home yet? And what was the point you wanted her to understand when you were scolding her?" She answered that she felt worried and afraid when her daughter wasn't home yet. And the point she wanted her daughter to understand was that the daughter shouldn't come home that late because it was dangerous, unwise, and it makes her mom worry. So I asked her if that was what she expressed when her daughter finally came home. And the mom answered no, because she became so angry and frustrated at her daughter that she wasn't able to communicate her point at all. All that she expressed and communicated was her anger. So I asked her again, "Do you think your daughter got your point? That she shouldn't come home that late because it's dangerous, unwise, and it makes you worry?" The mom answered, "Probably not." And she's right, because her anger overpowered her point. The only thing that probably registered in the daughter's mind is that what she did made her mom angry, and that she's being punished not because she did something wrong, but because of her mom's anger. And I know as a parent that it's frustrating when your child doesn't get your point. But maybe we should also check if we actually communicated our point first. Or did we just communicate our anger? This is also the same issue with all our other relationships. Husbands and wives also encounter this problem when they communicate their anger and not their point. This anger issue in communication has caused a lot of relationships to fall apart. Before we continue, if you haven't subscribed to my channel yet, please help me out by clicking that subscribe button and giving this video a like. Also, you can hit that notification bell so you will be updated when a new video is uploaded. Let's continue to number 4. Pride-controlled anger builds emotional walls. Most communication problems are actually connection problems. Without good connection with a person, you will always get misunderstood and misinterpreted. Connection is crucial to good communication. One of the biggest hindrances to good connection is an emotional wall. Emotional walls are made when a person has unresolved anger and they choose to express their anger by detaching themselves emotionally from the person they are angry at. They start to withhold their care, affection, trust, and respect that they once freely gave to that person. These emotional walls break the connection in relationships, and once that connection is broken, communication will start to suffer. Most people are unaware of these emotional walls that they build, but you can easily know if you have one by looking at the symptoms in that relationship. Here are a few of those symptoms. When you have little to no communication in that relationship. Constant miscommunication and misinterpretation. Loss of respect, care, affection, and trust. Emotional detachment. Easily irritated or lack of patience and understanding. When you have two or more of these symptoms, there is a big chance that you have an emotional wall in that relationship. And that's caused by some unresolved anger in your life, and it's starting to mess up with the communication in that relationship. So what can we do to avoid these problems caused by pride and anger? First, approach each conversation with humility. Fight the urge to think that you are the only one that's right, and that your opinion is the only one that matters, and your point is the only one that is acceptable. Second, have a listening heart and a listening mind. It takes more than just your ears to be a good listener. Your heart and mind has to be humble and open enough to really hear out what the other person is trying to say. Third, be understanding. As I said earlier, sometimes the goal of communication is not agreement, but understanding. So be willing to understand first and accept that there will be times that it's okay not to be in complete agreement. You don't have to take it personally as an attack or offense every time this happens to you. Seek for understanding, then if possible, agreement. Fourth, when in an argument, focus on your point. Always remember that your point is more important than your anger. Always remember that your point is more important than your anger, your frustration, or disappointment. If you're angry, frustrated, or disappointed, you can just tell the person how you feel, but never allow it to overpower or take the focus away from your main point. You can say something like, I'm really angry or disappointed at you, but I really want you to understand my point first. Then go ahead and state your point. When you do this, you're showing the other person that your point is more important than your feelings or than the anger that you want to express to them. Fifth and last, avoid building emotional walls. When you feel angry, don't allow your pride to turn it into bitterness, hatred, or revenge. Don't allow it to build an emotional wall. As we learned, emotional walls disconnect people, and it just adds to the communication problem in that relationship. Whenever you feel hurt or angry, choose to forgive right away and be conscious of your thoughts and feelings, and then watch out for that temptation to build an emotional wall. If you add all these things together, basically you fight anger and pride with humility, forgiveness, and love. James chapter 1 verse 19 says, "My dear brothers and sisters, take note of this. Everyone should be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to become angry." If you have any additional insights on how to deal with pride and anger in communication, why don't you share your thoughts in the comments below? That's it for us today. See you on the next video, and God bless you.